Awesome. Yes, we do want to make sure we capture this information if folks here today want to go back, because we'll be moving a little quickly to leave ample time for questions. So throughout this, I will ask some questions. I'll share resources in the chat where you can learn more. And if you have questions, please feel free to put your hand up, drop them in the chat. But we'll start with an introduction of our team, what we do here at NCBA CLUSA, and how we advance our mission to develop, advance, and defend the co-op business model. So NCBA CLUSA, National Cooperative Business Association, our team in government relations, we are here to serve you all in the cooperative community, whether you're a member or a stakeholder, by engaging with government and policymakers at all levels. This isn't limited to the federal government engagement. We also work closely with our partners at the International Cooperative Alliance to engage on cooperative issues writ large. So in the department, it is myself as Director of Government Relations and my colleague, Joe Cirincione, who could not be on today's call, who serves as our Government Relations Coordinator. And we represent your interest and the co-op business model across all sectors, doing a lot of education in the spirit of Principle 5. And I know cooperators here are a modest group writ large, because you all are so focused on doing the work, but you all truly are the best advocates for the co-op community, getting good policy, getting favorable laws passed, making sure that this shared ownership model, this democratic governance model that is not extractive, but keeps dollars local and empowers community, can expand, and that folks know that this is accessible. So I want everyone to truly feel empowered after today's conversation to use your voice and educate, whether that's your neighbors or policymakers in your local city or neighborhood councils, all the way to your representatives in the halls of Congress, because they don't want to hear from me at the end of the day. You all make my job easy in terms of promoting the work that you're doing on the ground. So I'm going to share a little bit of what that looks like and some of the issues that are top of mind in Congress. And we can go to the next slide. And lastly, we'll talk about how you all can get involved, where to start. So we advocate for co-ops. These are some of our key agencies with the USDA, the Foreign Agriculture Service, to support international development programs that support cooperative development, or programs like Farmer to Farmer. I see we have a volunteer on the call today. The Small Business Administration, because the question said they are intended to provide financing to co-ops, which are small businesses. But again, we'll dive into that issue later. And the Department of Labor, who is a new partner in the cooperative community with a new initiative that they have launched this year. And our key cooperative advocacy priorities, these are long-standing to support international development. NCBA CLUSA has done international cooperative development for over 70 years, making sure tax treatment is preserved and rural economic growth through the Farm Bill, which has had some action in the last couple of days here, as well as employee ownership and cooperative housing, given affordable housing is a crisis that every jurisdiction is looking to solve. And for some further resources, we'll send this PowerPoint out, but you can check out our policymakers guide and Farm Bill priorities. Next slide, please. So when we look at our advocacy priorities, we know the cooperative difference as cooperators. Some of us learn more across sectors about the great work that co-ops can do, but raise your hand. How many people have ever met or talked to a person or a government official at all? Whether that's going to your city council meeting, going to a planning commission meeting, raising virtual hands is great. Awesome. Attending NCBA CLUSA's Hike the Hill, fantastic. And how many of you, the first time you've mentioned co-ops or talked to that official or been in that meeting, and you say you're with a co-op, the first thing they ask is, what is a co-op? Raise your hand. Who gets that question? I get it. So to put it simply, I mentioned education before, and advocacy in its purest form is education in the spirit of Principle 5, that training and information. And that's what we do in so many ways. And I can imagine you all spend a lot of time doing. And talking to people about the cooperative difference shown here is an incredible way to start that education conversation. Co-ops are wholly owned by the member owners and democratically governed through board elections, who are the decision-making body, and that board is elected by the members of the co-op. So talking to people about these benefits of co-ops, how they can solve issues, how a new program or an existing one can benefit co-ops and vice versa, that's advocacy and that's education. Next slide, please. And so to start, in terms of spreading the good word on the benefits that cooperatives provide, we have to look at not just the direct economic benefits as small businesses that contribute to the economy through taxes or through patronage payments, which are payments to the member owners of the cooperative, but also by reinvesting and recirculating those dollars that supports other co-ops and small businesses within the community. And tax treatment is the ground floor of cooperatives and our top and longstanding advocacy priorities. This is to make sure that co-ops aren't taxed at both the business level and at the member level, to make sure those payments called patronage that the co-op provides to their member owners, known as dividends, by some people, or maybe more recognized as dividends, that members aren't being taxed at both of those levels. And there is current policy that acknowledges that co-ops as a business are designed to capture that economic value. And there is forthcoming legislation or advocacy that will need to be done with some expiring tax provisions next year, known as the 199A exemption for agriculture cooperatives. And I'll move pretty quickly through these, but the membership team has helpfully dropped the link to the policy priorities in the chat. So we'll go to the next slide here. In the spirit of Small Business Month, I would be remiss not to talk about employee ownership and support for worker cooperatives and consumer cooperatives, which are both eligible for loans from the Small Business Administration. As we mentioned, it is intended to provide capital to cooperatives. However, they require one person of a co-op to sign a personal guarantee, all of their assets, their home on the line, in order to get that loan, which really doesn't work with our model. As businesses that are wholly owned and governed by the member owners of a cooperative, everyone has equal stakes. So one person shouldn't have to sign their business on the, or all of their assets on the line in order to get that loan for the group of cooperators. And in 2018, NCBA CLUSA and many of the folks on this call here worked to get a law passed that we thought would solve this challenge. However, we have not seen it implemented. So one way you can get involved is by telling your member of Congress to support legislation to remove the personal guarantee requirement for co-ops. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing. And there are new opportunities simultaneously to support worker co-ops and employee ownership through the Department of Labor. A new program was created in 2022 that required the Department of Labor to coordinate with other agencies and promote employee ownership, meaning worker co-ops that are owned by the employees of the business. And this year is the first year that they will have grants available to nonprofits and to support converting existing businesses to cooperatives. 83% of small business owners don't have a succession plan. And what better way to preserve community institutions or to keep those good quality jobs or create better quality jobs than converting it to a cooperative. Otherwise, the alternative is that they close or get snapped up by some big corporation that ultimately has no skin in the game. So we can keep that community ownership by converting these small businesses to cooperatives. And similarly, the initiative will look at co-op data. There's a huge breadth of data that's available, but we haven't seen it, which is why we estimate that 65,000 number of cooperatives within the United States. Go to the next slide, please. Lastly here, I wanted to mention affordable housing through cooperatives. We've seen a rise of shared equity housing models, and we know this is a long-standing model that works, that provides resilience. In the Kahoot game, we looked at the average years of average number of businesses that fail before the 5-year mark. And the Interagency Working Group on Co-op Development just held a session talking about 99 years of statistics, looking at the resiliency of co-ops, a high number of which have been around for over 50, 90, even 100 years. So housing cooperatives are a meaningful and viable solution to preserving and providing affordable long-term housing. Right now, there's a program through HUD Section 213 that could support housing co-ops, and there's a special assistant for cooperatives, but we haven't seen that position filled. So our goal is to make sure that that position is filled, that the Section 213 program is useful and accessible, and to make sure that as Congress and city governments and county commissions look to address affordable housing within your respective communities, that housing cooperatives are included as a piece of that pie and at the forefront of that policy. We can go to the next slide here. So those are our top line advocacy priorities. I do want to mention how you can get involved. Number one is to attend the meetings of the Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development. They have a series of meetings that they host each year. And on this webpage, you can see the previous meetings on various topics. Another way is to subscribe to the Co-op Services quarterly newsletter, or to get updates from the fantastic folks we have on the team here. To invite your member of Congress or your senator or your county commissioner or your city council member to your co-op so that they can see what you do in your communities. Or to tell your member to join the Co-op Business Caucus, which is a group led by NCBA CLUSA, a bipartisan group of members of Congress who have indicated their fervent support for cooperatives and advocate for us as well. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention joining NCBA CLUSA as a member, or better yet, you don't have to be a member to attend the Impact Conference here in Washington, D.C. This year it will be from October 2nd through 3rd, and we will actually take a group up to hike the hill on the first afternoon, where you can meet with your members of Congress and talk about what's important to your co-op and how good policies would really help the community writ large. So that is what I have for you today. I want to stop there and see if there are any questions, more detail, hear about what your co-op is facing. If any challenges, open up the floor here.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you again, Aaliyah, for that. And as individuals start to raise their hand, feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we'll go through in order. But Matthew, I see your hand up first.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aaliyah, for that presentation. That was awesome. I was curious about that data coming online from the economic census. And if there's going to be is that going to be publicly available? Because I know that that's not always been easy to get that kind of data.
Yeah, great question, Matt, and appreciate it. And to give folks some more context, the U.S. Census Bureau, similar to what they send out every 10 years to every household, every 5 years, they send a survey out to every single business in the United States. In 2017, NCBA CLUSA and the co-op community got a question included, is your business a co-op? Which is huge. And that question was included again last year in 2022, meaning we can know the true number of co-ops in the United States, but we haven't seen the data yet. So to answer your question, Matt, they are in the process of looking through and comparing whether they got wildly crazy results, but they have agreed to publish it for the public. There is a website and landing page, and the date there is June 2025. So it's written on a government website, which hopefully means it will be set in stone, but we need to keep this top of mind for folks.
All right, and John, you have your hand raised?
Yes, I wanted to, I'm working with the Federation, the Rural Coalition, and a number of other groups on the Farm Bill. And I was just wondering, to me, it looks like the monies authorized and appropriated for the Rural Co-op Development Grant Program have been the same for the last 30 years. And as the co-op sector increases, I think the monies for that program should also be increased. And the way it's set up now, there isn't enough money to have a center in every state, if you think about it. And I know there's some states left out. The Federation's grants have been multi-state, but still the amount of money has not really been sufficient to do the kind of intensive education, training, and development work that we would like to do. So I'm just wondering, I really joined this call today because I'm concerned about that aspect of the Farm Bill, but others that impinge on cooperatives as well.
Yes, that is a fantastic question, John, and appreciate the plug to increase funding for the Rural Cooperative Development Grant and Socially Disadvantaged Groups Grant, which are the two programs that allow nonprofit co-op development centers to support cooperative development through education, training, startup, even exploration committees, and preserving jobs within communities. And it is authorized through the Farm Bill, which happens typically every 5 years, and it is set to expire at the end of this year. NCBA CLUSA has championed this program for a very long time in the authorization and reauthorization and appropriations process to get an increase of funding, but it's been flat for about 15 years, as John mentioned. We were excited to see that this was included in the Farm Bill proposals that were released yesterday to support multi-year grants, but an increase in funding is what is truly needed. And that's happening right now. I think that's something everyone, whether you're in a rural community or non-rural, should tell your member of Congress to support. And the Strengthening Rural Cooperatives and Communities Act, endorsed by many folks here with us today and supported by NCBA CLUSA, was introduced in both the House and in the Senate. There are also other opportunities within the Farm Bill proposals that would support cooperative development, like the Rural Partnerships and Prosperity Act, which goes to every state as proposed, but it needs to pass and needs to pass before September 30th. And looking at other opportunities to support co-op development within the Farm Bill, whether that's local and regional food systems, supporting producers, but strengthening economic development and placing co-ops at the forefront. And I see Robbie dropped in the chat here. Yes, to let everyone know that RCDG funding needs increases in order to support those multi-year grants, because change takes a while to happen, but we need that money to support those multi-year grants. So I'd be happy to connect further, John, on some of those efforts and hear about how we can collaborate.
Excellent. All right, we have 2 more hands raised before we wrap up. Renee and then Matthew, and I think those are going to be the last 2 that we will be able to accommodate today.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was having audio issues earlier. We're not a member of NCB CLUSA, but I am based in Washington, DC with a housing co-op, and I'm pretty attuned to all the goings on in Washington, especially in the federal government. I do want to point out something that I'm interested in the cooperative communities, and especially NCB CLUSA's position on the Corporate Transparency Act. There's a new requirement for businesses to report for completely different purposes, financial crime reporting with illicit, activities of terrorist financing, but it's impacting our cooperative. We'd like to think we don't have any terrorists in house, but it is overly broad. It is a very big thing for small businesses. I saw there was a litigation. And I've been looking around that I believe it's a small business, their interest group has been very active with getting other small businesses to be aware of the new requirements. But I would be very interested what NCB and CLUSA's position is, because even as a co-op in DC, there's a lot of other co-ops that are not even aware of this, requirement. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Renee, and so much good conversation to fit into a short amount of time. So I think this means a part 2 will be coming up soon here, but you're absolutely correct. The Corporate Transparency Act will impact a number of cooperatives. There are some that are exempt. And as Renee mentioned, this is part of a counterterrorism through the U.S. Department of Treasury that requires all owners, beneficial owners, as they call it, to provide personal information on who owns each business. For co-ops, that does put us in a little bit of a conundrum, given it's wholly governed by the member owners. However, existing businesses do have until January 1st, 2025 to comply. There are fines associated, and the most impacted sectors are likely to be housing cooperatives, resident-owned communities, worker cooperatives, and some others that are required to file and not exempt. But this is top of mind. I dropped a resource in the chat, and we do have a few blogs on our website that details the Corporate Transparency Act and how and if and whether your co-op will be impacted, along with timelines. But yes, this is absolutely something folks should familiarize themselves with. And there is the FinCEN hotline that puts out compliance requirements, and the FAQ page that they're updating pretty regularly. But happy to connect further with folks.
Okay, you got your last question with Matthew.
Yeah, sort of actually a related question, but this is more specifically about the personal guarantee requirement of the SBA 7A loan program. I heard recently from someone who was speaking on behalf of SBA that there was talk of like an alternative to this in the form of like sort of a third party acting as a personal guarantor on behalf of a cooperative to kind of bypass individuals having to do it. Can you comment at all on that?
I think if I'm thinking about it correctly, that's the entity guarantee requirement that was proposed as an alternative to the personal guarantee, where yes, a third party or business can certify for a loan from the SBA. The historic 2020 Fredericksburg Food Co-op loan was provided using an entity guarantee. The challenge is that it requires a co-op to be well-resourced to get the loan. Typically, that loan is being used for startup, and it essentially locks up the capital that could be used to support a co-op opening. I think some folks on the call might know that timeline from, getting startup capital to opening can be incredibly lengthy. And so the money that would be tied up in that entity guarantee could be better used for the co-op itself. And they've waived the personal guarantee before during the pandemic, during the PPP and EIDL programs. And our data shows 98% of co-ops that got those loans are still around today and still in good standing, anecdotally. So the easiest alternative, I think, to unlock this resource for the co-op community is for them to waive it, as they did with these programs, which were wildly successful for cooperatives. But fantastic question, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much again for joining us today. Again, thank you for Aaliyah for hosting today's conversation. If there is any other follow-up questions that you might have, resources that you might like to gain access to, or individuals you'd like to connect with, again, we encourage you to drop that information in the chat. Our last couple of closing remarks is just to encourage you all to join in with us next month for our next co-op circle conversation. It won't be a happy hour like this, but it will be scheduled for about 60 to 90 minutes. More information will to come from that. But it will be a town hall conversation on childcare and cooperatives. And Tamla, I'm not sure if you wanted to share any more about that before we say our final farewell.
Oh yeah, that is it. We have a group that is working to create and expand co-op usage for childcare solutions, and so that's what we will have on Wednesday, June 5th.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Feel free to hang back for a few extra moments to gather the information in the chat, the links, or if you'd just like to send a quick note to each other before you hop off, happy to do that. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you all for the discussion today.
You.
And if you check out the chat, advocacy@ncba.coop, our team monitors that regularly, so please feel free to reach out to us. Hope to see everyone next week.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Robbie.